Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick, Joe Saward, and I had about the 2026 Australian Grand Prix. The new regulations have arrived. Mercedes stepped forward. Ferrari showed pace and then handed away positions. Oscar Piastri never made it to the grid. And in the opening 12 laps, we saw more lead changes than most races produce in a full afternoon. As you'll hear, the three of us couldn't agree on what we had just watched, whether those opening laps were the best argument for the new rules or the best argument against them. May depend on who you ask. Before we get to our conversation though, I need to ask, can you help us out? If this show adds value to your F1 experience, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app. Share the episode with other F1 fans. That's how people find us, and it's how we keep growing this community. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, everybody, I am still processing the Australian Grand Prix, and I am delighted that today, Dick, we not only have ourselves in this conversation, but we have the wonderful Joe Saward joining us for this, and he is in Australia. And so I want to hurry and get to the conversation because Joe has another plane to catch. And I think this might be a repeated refrain that we will have anytime we get an opportunity with Joe is he's on the go.
Anytime we get with Joe. Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
So we have already recorded our race notes, shared our thoughts, and I want to use this time to kind of review and discuss some of the things that we said in our race notes, but even more to take a few more of the questions to both of you. So specifically, I want to start with our race highlights. For me, the highlight was the opening laps. George and Charles trading the lead as that energy deployment cycled through. It was spectacular to watch. But I know from your race notes and even mine, Dick, we pointed out that we just kind of questioned whether or not that was really organic. But it was really kind of nice for the start of the season. And I do have some questions about whether or not we actually think this is going to continue race by race. So that's my highlight. Dick, I want to throw it to you and ask you to share your highlight.
Well, I'm a little bit like you in that I watched the opening laps and I watched George and Charles going at it. And the first couple of times it happened, I was like, oh, wow, this is fun to watch. I'm pleasantly surprised that this is going on. And then I thought to myself, no, wait a minute. What's happening is one guy has a fully charged battery, the other guy's doing his energy harvesting, and it just so happens they're out of sync with each other, so they're passing each other back and forth. Now, it made great theater, and for somebody who's new to the sport, I'm sure that they were, like really captivated by it. And I admit it was fun to watch, but it was, the racer in me was sort of like, yeah, but if they didn't have to, manage energy like they do, well, then we wouldn't be seeing this right now. So a little bit of a mixed bag with me. I am taking a little bit more of a wait and see attitude about the new regs and how they're going to race, because I know that Melbourne was a little bit of a special situation. Anyway, I'd be interested to hear what Joe has to say.
I think that we are in a situation where there's so much to learn, and it's really a very compressed learning period, but that's what Formula One is brilliant at. So this is where I think we will come through it at the end with flying colours. But I am, as I said before, slightly alarmed about 1 or 2 safety issues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you talk about the Bahrain and Saudi races being TBD, I thought to myself, if they are canceled or they're not able to race, it's going to be the teams turning lemons into lemonade of utilizing that. They're not going to waste that time. And if anything, what you said about the Chinese Grand Prix and the Japanese Grand Prix, we know that compressed window, they had to have been planning as teams, even during winter, the data and the processing and actual implementation, they had to have known that they wouldn't be able to see all the return on that investment of time and energy immediately. I think that's something that I really do respect about the teams and their abilities to say, where are the realistic wins that we can have, especially at the beginning. But I think we're seeing it so acutely in this reg cycle because of the chassis and the power unit changes coming together. You guys correct me. We've never had this at this level, like both of them changing simultaneously, right? It's usually consecutively. Is that correct?
We have had some, but we're talking in another era when Formula One wasn't at all the same. So you can go back to 1961 or 1963. There were very big changes, and 66 as well. Very big changes, but it was different then. Teams had 10 people. And nowadays you have 1,000. So it's a very different thing. And the level at which they were competing as well. In those days, it was normal for cars to break down all the time, and it was normal for people to win by a lap. Nowadays it's not. Right. So you can't really compare it to anything else. But certainly in the modern era, there's been nothing like this.
Yeah. In the modern era, we're pushing the boundaries even more than we ever have with the level of technology that's in the car. That puts another level of challenge, I would presume. Dick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you actually took the words right out of my mouth. Is just that when you introduce the kind of technology that has been introduced with this new set of regs, there's a lot of envelopes that are getting pushed here from the power unit standpoint, and so, to Joe's earlier point, there's no doubt that as the teams go to work, they're going to start finding solutions because now they have real world data as opposed to running a simulation, and so I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, I want to make a point. I noticed that when the negativity phase was going on, some of the IndyCar people were leaping in and saying, we have real racing, we don't have lift and coast and all this stuff. And I just want to point out, and I wrote this the other day, and I'm still sort of sniggering because it's a terrible thing to say, but it's true, which is they do have good racing. It's terrific, but their cars are almost as old as Arvid Lindblad.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure.
And of course you're going to have close racing if everyone's got the same car and it's been developed to the absolute maximum. So I think it's a bit silly to just take cracks at Formula One just because we're doing stuff that nobody else has ever tried to do before. I just think it's a cheap shot, basically. Anyway.
No, I was just going to say, it what I've been wondering about is how big of a difference are these regs, and I suspect that they're massively different, but I don't know that for sure, compared to, say, the cars that Toyota and Audi produced in the late 2010s, early 2020s, that were such sophisticated hybrids. I don't know the answer, but I suspect that while those cars really pushed the boundaries of hybrid technology back then, I'm thinking this is another big leap forward, but I've never seen anything to really describe just how big of a leap that was. But I know those cars were pretty sophisticated.
Yeah, I think, people say that they shouldn't be lifting and coasting and all this stuff in the sport. If you go back to the 1980s with the massive turbos and the turbo lags, it's not very different to that kind of thing. We're just dealing with technology that was so out there. The 1.5 litre turbos of the 1980s were just phenomenal engines. 1 horsepower per square centimetre. I don't know what it is in American inches or whatever you call it, but it's just amazing. 1 horse in 1 cubic centimetre, and that kind of technology. You're going to have those cars were beasts, absolute beasts. The turbo lag and all the rest of it. So it's kind of like that, but this is even more technology because you've got the fuel and you've got 50% electric. It's in terms of why the manufacturers are here and not in the other championships is that this is where they can get the most value, technologically speaking, and from an image point of view. And that's why IndyCar has struggled to find more than 2 manufacturers, to be honest, because they're just not very interesting in terms of technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't disagree with you, by the way. I really don't.
Well, can I push back a little bit then? Because I'm trying to reconcile that in my mind. In the sense that, okay, so help me understand. When you say back in the day that there was lift and coast, but it wasn't as technological, is what I'm hearing you say. Like the tech wasn't really doing the lift and coast. It was the manual aspect of the driver. Is it a good simplification of what you're saying?
Not totally, because I mean the turbo were so young in the development of turbocharging that they were brutal, and that is, I think, the key point. It was before they were really well developed, and so you would have this massive turbo lag, and suddenly all the power would come in at one go, and that's not very different to what we're looking at here in Melbourne at the weekend. It's kind of similar, and the things that when you're going around a corner and a massive chunk of torque comes in, and you go spinning off into a wall like Piastri did, or actually what happened to Max too, pretty much in the qualifying session. These are things that happen when you have really new and advanced technologies. So, but it very quickly calmed down, and that's the point I think that's important. They worked on it, they made it better, and in the end, they soon had a product that wasn't as crazy as it looked at the very beginning.
How long did it take for that progress to happen? Was it within a season, or was it multiple seasons?
Well, no, the first turbo came in 77, and they were getting to a sort of sensible level. It was never sensible because it was always insane. but the formula in the end, the FIA downgraded it slowly by reducing the power levels by just for safety. But the cars became more drivable over time. But it was years, not. But again, that's another area. You see a different era, different size teams, and now they're working on it so much that I'm sure it will come fast.
Yeah, I think that if what you're saying, if we look at the past as a guide, and there's the ability for this to progress quickly, and it's just the short-term pain, I think I can handle that. I guess what I struggle with is that it feels so counterintuitive, the racing right now. What we saw the other day, the idea that you're not going, at least from a perception as a non-racer observing it, that you're not asking the racer, the driver, the person who's been told to like really master the vehicle. It's more the technology that's boosting him and pushing him where he needs to go and giving that extra It does feel like, I think one of the drivers even said, like, you're playing a video game. That's not what I want to see as a spectator watching the TV. I'm wanting to see the person, the marriage of a team and a person harnessing a machine and doing it with the other.
You saw that at the weekend with George Russell doing it. And George was very clear about it. He said that it's not counterintuitive once you figure it out. He said it was fine it just became a habit. That's what you did. And then, of course, they'd never raced one another. They'd just gone around testing. And so, but you could see with him and Charles, when they were racing each other, they knew what they were doing. And there was no part of that was sort of luck or otherwise. They were racing each other, and they were using the machines to do what that they could best do. I think Max summed it up best of the lot, really, although he's not a fan at the moment. He said, give me a shopping trolley and I'll make the shopping trolley go as fast as it can go. And that's what racing drivers do. They handle what they're given, and therefore give them whatever you like, and that that's their job. And okay, sometimes they didn't like the porpoising last year. They didn't like this. They don't like that. But at the end of the day, the same guys come out ahead, and that is that's really the technology is useful in one respect, and on the other respect, it doesn't really matter, because that if you give Max and Charles shopping trolleys, they'll be at the front.
Yeah, I do agree with you in that and see that. The way I looked at it was like everyone had gone to science class and you had all these hypotheses, and then they developed their science experiment and showed up to science fair. And this was the first round of a multi-round science fair. And then they're all looking around going, oh, well, you did that. And they have the ability for next round of science fair to take from what they've seen. And these are the most highly competitive scientific minds that I think we can find. And so they're going to figure it out. That's why I'm skeptical, but I'm I'm leaning more to the positive side. I just wonder if the regs have hampered what would end or restricted things that I don't know that was necessary. Like, did it bring, and what did it bring us as a result? That's what I'm still processing and trying to figure out. And I don't think that this one race answers that question. I think we have to see more of it and watch how the teams update, upgrade, and learn. So Dick, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think, again, I think we've got to give it time. You know, we were racing on a track that everybody said going in was not going to be super favorable to this formula because it was an energy consumer. And of course, with us going to China next weekend, I think about that long straightaway that they've got at China. And I wonder how that's going to work. Right. And so, you know, I mean, I'm like you, I've got a lot of open questions, but one thing that I would say is that I really like how agile the cars look. You know, they've made them look a little bit smaller. They're a little bit lighter, all those kinds of things. And I think that added a lot to me, power unit notwithstanding. I like these chassis better than the ground effect cars. And I think they're going to be fun to watch in Monaco. I mean, it just, to the eye, you could just tell that they were kind of, you know, as we say, get up on the wheel just a little bit and kind of chuck it around a little bit. And the car was okay with it. In fact, it was just fine with that, you know, where the ground effect car, you always were worried about what is the air doing under the tunnel. So, yeah, it's pretty nice.
So let's start with Mercedes. In my opinion, they're the benchmark. George was composed throughout. I think Kimi recovered from a very difficult start, but he finished. And the bigger story, in my opinion, is what they didn't show. Like, I think that there's still a lot left in that car. And my takeaway for that is from George's statement at the end of the race when he said, I love this car. And I feel like he knows what they still have yet to release. Y'all's thoughts?
I absolutely agree with that. I think there's one other thing that was absolutely astonishing about Mercedes in the course of the weekend was how they got Kimi back in qualifying. You know, because he trashed the car completely in FP1 in the last bit of FP1, and they got it running, and he put it second on the grid. I mean, wow. And yeah, Kimi, he's a sensible bloke, and he said, I'm not the hero today. He said, those guys are the heroes, and that's absolutely right. But in terms of, you know, I think the pace they have, certainly towards the end of the race, they were not going super quick, and so yeah, they have some performance in hand. But you know, that was true at certain times last year of McLaren. You know, so it does a little bit depend from race to race, circuit to circuit as well. I think we'll see. We've only done the one circuit, but I think that will be the case as well. But I think fundamentally, yeah, right now they're ahead of the game for sure.
Dick, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think one of the things that was really interesting to me is that if you look at Mercedes overall performance, and then you look at the other Mercedes powered teams, Williams, Alpine, McLaren, they did not have the handle on that like Mercedes had the handle on it. And I think some of that was Mercedes understood better how to use their engine, which I think makes sense. But I also have to wonder, okay, just how good is the Mercedes chassis as well? Because I was really expecting more from both Alpine and Williams. Both of them were just kind of, I mean, you could tell they were kind of floundering. And certainly McLaren didn't look super happy either. But Mercedes, on the other hand, supposedly the same engines, they were kind of no worries, you know. So I thought it was interesting.
Let's move on to Ferrari. Here's what I'll say. They had real pace, in my opinion, but they had a familiar problem, which is their strategy. I'll leave that at that. What do you guys think?
Absolutely. They messed up on strategy. Now, was it enough for them to win the race? Probably not. But they would have been closer at the end. So, you know, in the end, it looked like a very dominant Mercedes 1-2, but I think they would have been a lot closer if they hadn't screwed up on that strategy. And I just don't get it. I mean, literally, people in the grandstands are yelling, "Go into the pits." And Lewis is going, "Why is nobody going into the pits here?" What are these strategists doing? I just don't. There's something wrong there. Whether it is the messaging, the way that the decisions are made, but they just keep on doing it. They keep getting it wrong all the time. So there's a serious amount of work needed there on that front, because they are hurting themselves. But the car's quick, and Lewis is happy. Lewis, who last year was not happy, Lewis is pretty happy. He wasn't happy about the strategy thing, but he knows he's got a car that can do stuff. So.
I feel so validated, Joe, that even you, with all of your experience and up close and personal views of all that you have over the years, and especially with Ferrari, that you're even dumbfounded as to why this is continuing to happen. That makes me feel so much better. What about you, Dick? What are your thoughts about Ferrari and what we saw?
Well, of course, I always will go back to my favorite one-liner, which is that Ferrari is a circular firing squad. So I'm going to start there, because they're really good at killing themselves. And how, okay, as a guy that watches IndyCar races, Joe, I know enough to know about strategy that if the leader goes in for a pit stop, you at least cover him with one of your team cars, at least one, please, and in this case, Ferrari just stayed out. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? So anyway, I was dumbfounded. I couldn't figure that one out, but maybe we should send our resumes in to Ferrari and say, look, I think we can do at least as good as you jokers.
I really like that, Dick. We should do that. But we'll move on to Red Bull for the sake of time. Here's what I'll say. I think it was a weekend of contrast. Max's qualifying shunt and then the recovery drive. And then Isack's impressive showing was then cut short. Like, to me, I just felt like there was going back and forth, yin and yang emotionally watching it. But I walked away from the race hopeful that Red Bull could really provide some amazing racing later down the road. They actually exceeded my expectations, considering they were building their own power unit. That was my take. What about y'all?
Well, I think, first of all, I was super impressed with Hadjar. It seems like they've either got a driver that can drive the second Red Bull, or they've figured out how to build a car that both Max and the second driver can drive. I'm not sure which one that is. Obviously, Hadjar is pretty special talent. I thought he did an amazing job. When his engine let go, I immediately started wondering what the implications of that might be for Max and the Racing Bulls as well. Because you just never know, right? And so I wondered about that just a little bit. I felt like, though, they were looking pretty reasonable. I think they had the measure of McLaren, but I don't think they had the measure. Well, I know they didn't have the measure of either Mercedes or Ferrari, but it seems like there's potential there. And, if Max starts smelling blood, I think he's going to be pretty tough to beat with that car if they get just a little bit more development and refinement on it. And that's kind of my take.
Joe, I have a question for you, kind of dovetailing from this. Is your reporting before the season flagged that the FIAs had stipulated the ECU had significant reliability issues, that the glitches were actually expected to cause failures at the start of the year, and the teams knew about this and were working with the FIA to address it? But was there a view that the issues hadn't been fully resolved? Like, do you see where I'm kind of leading with that question?
I think there were serious problems, but I don't think that any of that actually obviously translated onto the track. I'm not sure entirely what caused Hadjar to retire. I think it might have been a gearbox or a transmission rather more than the engine, but I'm not 100% sure about that, because they weren't 100% sure of that either. I think that in a way, I think Red Bull underperformed because Racing Bulls was so close to them, and that wouldn't normally be the case. There would be normally a bigger gap between the two teams but Racing Bulls is getting better all the time. They're hiring good people. They're really coming into their own. So I think that Red Bull, obviously Max's accident didn't help at all. And I think we'll see. I think you have to, they are behind the others, but they're not that far behind. And I just think we need to see a weekend when it's not chaos all the time. And because it really was chaos all the time, the Australian Grand Prix weekend. So again, I think we'll see what happens next week and the weekend in Japan to get a better picture.
Okay, moving on to McLaren. The reigning champions had what I would consider a very painful weekend. Oscar's race ended before it even started. So I wonder what y'all's thoughts are about the team's performance this week.
Well, I think that if you looked when in qualifying, for example, Oscar was practice as well. Oscar was on it a lot more. Lando wasn't. Lando seemed a bit lost, but Lando has a habit of starting seasons quite slowly and sort of building up over time. But I thought that Oscar was really much on it, and it didn't seem that far off. Now in the end, it didn't look that way if you looked at the numbers on the grid. And then of course you had the disaster at the start. Well, not even at the start, on the recognition laps, I call them, but I think they're known as installation laps by other people. But so I don't think we saw the full value of what McLaren can do. But I think they were I think it's true of all of the teams, to be honest. They were all just a bit hand to mouth. And so, and I'm sure all of them went away going, we can do better than that. And that's the way Formula One is too, It's always, we can do better than that.
Yeah, and I would add to that I think that it's fair to say that McLaren has figured out how to develop a car over the last 3 or 4 years. And they're going to get stronger. I mean, everybody's going to get stronger. It's just, what's the pace of that development? And I would put, McLaren certainly has proven that they can develop rather quickly. But so can Mercedes, so can Red Bull, and Ferrari probably, they should be able to. But again, I love to hate on Ferrari. So that's one of my deals.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point you've made there. And it actually leads on to we can leap through some of the other teams quite quickly here, because I think the reason that Williams and Alpine were not up to speed was the fact that they don't have the industrial capacity, or they've lost the people. They need much more rebuilding to be done. And they were building brand new cars for the first time in years, because in previous years, for the last 5 years or so, they're just rehashing last year's car. You're not building something completely new. And I think that's why they were all... I mean, Alpine did a better job getting things ready for the race. Williams were behind from the start because they missed the first test. And the car's overweight because they had to make compromises, to get the car out in time. So I think production, and this is a side of the sport that fans don't always see, but the production that is needed to get these things working and to get the development programs working is phenomenal. And that's why Lawrence Stroll spent all that money on a vast new factory. That's why there's Racing Bulls have been upgrading their factory. Alpine have been working to hire new people because they lost so many. Williams have got a plan to build more buildings. All this stuff, they're all just still catching up. And Haas is the same to some extent. So that is one of the reasons that there are these gaps, although they have the same engines. And that's why my point, going back to the Red Bull Racing Bulls shouldn't have been as quick as Red Bull. But they were, nearly.
No, I was just going to say, I looked at it as, wow, Racing Bulls has really done a great job over the off season, because I tend to be maybe a little bit too simplistic. But when I listen to Joe, I'm kind of like, yeah, really, Red Bull underperformed. There should be a larger gap. Although, like he says, I mean, they must. they both look pretty damn good. I mean, both of the Racing Bulls cars. I thought they acquitted themselves well throughout much of the weekend. Maybe not all of it, but much of the weekend. I thought they looked pretty good.
Yeah, going back to McLaren and the Alpine Williams aspect of it, I do think that McLaren is the best positioned Mercedes customer to close that gap because of what you said. And I think that it will be interesting to watch how Alpine addresses its issues, which are, in my opinion, like the leadership and culture issues, versus the Williams, which is the infrastructure and just the more overall foundation infrastructure issues that they need to build out. And so it'll be a nice case study in my mind watching that and all of those comparisons together. So then going to Haas, I wrote in my notes that they were quiet, methodical, and effective, and that they were able to continue the trajectory that I think that they have been building over these last few years. And Ollie was the highest placed midfield driver in his second year. I thought that was very notable. What about you guys?
Well, I think Ollie's a major league talent. So, and we saw that when he got into the Ferrari for the first time in Saudi. He just did it. Boom. And, that's the thing. So many of these guys are super talents. Look at Lindblad, just arriving in his first weekend in Formula One, scoring points and just doing an amazingly cool, calm job. Hadjar, these guys are all spectacular, but Ollie's, he really is super good. So, and I agree with you on your assessment of Haas. Haas does have infrastructure problems to some extent, but it's just a good, solid package, and it's got good, solid scientific leadership now under Io Komatsu. I think they're just they're chipping away and getting the job done.
Dick, you have anything to add?
No, I can't really add anything. I'm a big Ollie Behrman fan myself, and so, I thought he did a fantastic job over the weekend. So, I'll be interested to see how long it is before he's wearing, red overalls.
Okay. Well, then on that note, let's move on to Cadillac. I wrote in my notes that it was their first ever Formula One Grand Prix for an American team, and they finished the race in one car. And I think that was probably bigger success than maybe many people thought that they can do. What are y'all's thoughts?
Well, the team's about as American as I am, to be fair. But
just like us.
There is an intention to be more American, but it isn't. It isn't an American team. It's a Ferrari customer which has had chassis built in England. So let's not get carried away about that. There's been a lot of hype. To be honest, they did pretty much what was expected. Most of the people who understand these things in Formula One, engineers and stuff, said, well, they're going to be 3 seconds off the pace just because that's the package they're creating. Will be 3 seconds off the pace or 4 seconds off the pace. They were exactly that. So they did a decent job. The big issue for me is what they've promised the backers. We don't necessarily know what that is, but if your expectations are too high, you can say we did a good start race. Yes, they did. But was it surprising where they were? No. But and as Aston Martin hopefully improves, and we saw early on in the race that Fernando made that car actually go quite quick. That I think we're going to see that Cadillac will be solidly at the back. Now, I'll be interested to see whether the chair and president of GM are coming to races often. I'm not sure they will be, because maybe just maybe they've been promised the world, and they might not realize that the world is not going to come to them instantly. It's a long process, but you've got to manage expectations, and I think one or two people in that empire are a little bit out of control with expectation and what they've told other people. But we'll see. On the whole, it was a good, solid job, and we'll see how it goes from here. But there's so many elements to this game that and hype is one of them. You don't want to hype things too much. Mercedes spent the whole winter hyping downwards, and that's actually the way to do it. So
yeah, I do agree with you that the hyping downwards is a much safer and wiser course of action, because then you can always build on that. But especially coming right out of the gate and putting expectations so high, and if you do not meet it, it's putting unreasonable, in my opinion, expectations on a team. And it doesn't help for the culture if you can't meet those very high expectations. Dick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in alignment with y'all. I mean, my expectations, I had a pretty low bar set for them, and so they came in, they did pretty much what I figured that they would do, and I think there's a reason they've got a couple of very experienced drivers who are there really to work alongside the engineers and help develop the project down the road, whatever that looks like. And so, solid start, and I think you'll see incremental gains through the year as they start learning. The thing is that the other teams are going to develop at a more rapid pace than Cadillac does, and so you may see a widening of the gap before the gap starts shrinking. That's the only thing I'm wondering about. But yeah.
Well, and I think it'll be very interesting for people to go back and do a comparison of Haas versus Cadillac in their early years and how they're going to move through these first few races. And that, we don't know right now. We've said it already for everybody. This is just one race. And Cadillac had a decent performance, but we don't know what's going to happen in China. Everybody else is dealing with that. This is a brand new team with building it and putting it all together. I'm trying to keep my expectations very low. And maybe that's why I was pleased with their results. And so I want to move on to Audi, which is kind of a different situation in my mind. I don't see them as a new team. I just see them as an iteration of an existing team. And I felt like it was technically a milestone weekend, but it was mixed results. I was expecting so much more from them. What about you guys?
I wasn't expecting very much more. In fact, I'd say they did more than I expected, to be honest, because there have been lots of stories about how poor the engine was, or the power unit was, and yet it wasn't. It was decently solid. Okay, Nico never got to start the race because there was some glitch, but the fact is that throughout the weekend they were doing a very decent job, and they were sort of kicking around the bottom of the top 10 all the time, and that's good, because for many years Sauber hasn't been doing that. So the team is obviously moving forward. They're bringing in different people. They've got different management. They are, they're on a mission, and they are a major car company. So I think they were solid and better than I thought they would be. So there you are.
Yeah, I thought they were punching above their weight, and I thought Bortoleto, again, he's another one of these guys that we were just talking about. He's really good, man, and it'll be interesting to see how he develops this year. And all of them, any of what I would call the sophomores, right, that are in their second season. They've been to all the tracks now. They know what the pressure really is like, and so how do they develop here on this next year? I think it's going to be fascinating. And Bortoleto, I mean, let's face it, he delivered. I mean, he did a good job.
Yeah, I do think the team should be very proud of him, considering what I would have imagined. The team had a lot of weight placed on Nico and whatever he was going to achieve during that race. His consistency on the grid and his racing time would have given them so much data. That he'd already given them data over the weekend. And to lose that, and then it all riding on Gabby, I thought he really rose to that challenge, and I was quite impressed that he got to that point. Okay, so then let's move on to Racing Bulls. We've already kind of talked about him. Arvid, I was kind of shocked at how good he did. For being the only rookie on the grid, I was quite proud of him. I thought he carried himself. I know it's only one race, but he carried himself with such poise that I didn't expect from him, because we don't know as much about him, but he was smooth, throughout so much of the weekend, and that confidence, and then his qualifying, all of it. And then to give points, I thought was just a genuine achievement that should be applauded. What about you guys? I know, Joe, you've already kind of talked a little bit about it, but if there's anything else you want to add to that, you're welcome. Dick, your thoughts? Anything else?
No, I think you summed it up really, really well. I don't know much about Lindblad, to be honest with you. And so this was kind of my first introduction to him, quite frankly. But I mean, to step in as a rookie and score points in your first Grand Prix, I mean, it's not unheard of, but it's not the norm either. So yeah, full props to that kid. Let's see how he does as the season goes on, but he sure is off to a good start.
Yeah, I love that he was willing to do battle with even Lewis. That showed a lot of strength, in my opinion, and character. Okay, so then let's move on to Alpine. I think that Alpine's saving grace was very much Pierre Gasly and his willingness to continue pushing forward. But you referenced this earlier, Joe, and I'm glad that you did. I was so concerned on the Franco near shunt into Liam, which I was so impressed with his ability to respond and react. And I think if he hadn't had that kind of response, we would be having a very different conversation today. And that concerns me. So the safety aspect of it, I don't ever want to see crashes. I try to tell people all the time, that is not the goal of Formula One. It's not to see crashes. We're trying to do everything but that. So y'all's thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, how he avoided Liam, because he was obscured. He couldn't see Liam at all, because I think it was Ollie Behrman was in front of him until the last minute, and Ollie pulled off to one side, and then suddenly he just arrived behind Liam, and it was like sort of, oh my God. And I don't know if you saw on the TV, but after the race, George was watching in the cool down room, and George's reaction was, whoa, because that was seriously scary. And he also, I mean, the other thing was he went through a gap between the wall and Colapinto. I think he actually didn't touch the wall, but it was just phenomenal. And that shows you the level of these guys. Their abilities are extraordinary, really extraordinary. I don't know if you saw on the grid, Lindblad was doing some exercises on the grid where they were dropping things and catching him. And I watched them doing that and just think, how the hell can you do that? It's unbelievable how sharp and quick these guys are. And I've tried that actually, because one of the teams, I can't remember which one, last year said, try this. And, and it was embarrassing, because we all think we're quite, switched on and sharp and all the rest of it, but wow, forget it. These guys are in another world.
Yeah, those hand-to-eye coordination drills, of course, I'm doing that, getting ready to start my season, and I'm pathetic, beyond pathetic. And so, I know that there's at least a second just in getting the hand-to-eye coordination back where it needs to be.
Okay, our final team, I'm agreeing with you guys, because it was quite impressive to watch that pre-race hand-eye coordination. But let's move to the last team, which is Williams. Tell me what your thoughts are. I will say is I think that Canada may be the first real opportunity where we see where they really stand under these new regs. I think that they're still in that renovation mode, in my mind, of untangling the mess that they've been in for the last few years. And then you add in now these new regs and them responding to it. I just don't see anything before Canada. Does anybody agree, disagree?
No, I disagree. Because I think that they, at certain points in the race, if they'd done different things and the strategy been different, they could have scored points. They weren't that far behind, but they didn't maximize. I hate to say maximize the potential, because I sound like a Formula One driver, but that they didn't maximize the potential. But their problem is very clear to me, and that is the car is way too heavy. And they'll be doing it already. They just need to take tons and tons and tons of weight off that car. And when they do that and they get it reliable, because there were lots of glitches through the weekend as well, but there's no reason that they can't be doing well. You need to have probably 5 or 6 races. So I guess that takes us to Canada. But basically, that's the biggest problem they have. In the overall scheme of things, I think the car's pretty decent. It's just that it's heavy, and you just can't afford that kind of weight. But that was a necessary evil. They had to have the weight to get the car out in time. So, this is why everything depends on everything else.
And if anything, as they're watching the Mercedes engine, how it's performing, that also gives them data to know where their adjustments can happen on everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's... we should bear in mind that Mercedes had a slightly different engine, and they're supposed to give everyone the same engine. But during the winter testing, it wasn't in racing. Their engine was slightly more advanced version, I think. So everybody else was catching up. They were all given because they have to have the same engines at the races. But during the testing, that's not necessarily the case. And I think just from a production point of view, the capacity, they didn't have enough capacity to produce enough engines to do the necessary. And so some of them were obviously older versions. So, that's another element. What we forget is that, and this goes back to the very beginning point we had about, when you have cars that have been developed for years and years and years and years, they're all very close together. Well, we're just at the beginning of that process now. We expected the grid to expand in terms of time, and it did. And there are people who, we haven't talked about Aston Martin, but they're just in a complete mess. But they're not in a... I think the engine's a real mess. But I think in terms of the car, that's clearly a car with some potential. Because Alonso, at some point in the race, I seem to recall he was up in sort of 11th or 12th place. I'm going, what in the world's going on? How did that happen? Of course, it's Alonso, so... but, there's obviously potential, and they just got to get stuff fixed. And Honda's behind. But what are they going to do? You can't change the engine. You can't go off with somebody else, in the middle of a season these days. It's just not possible. So they're going to have to just dig deep and close the gap. But having said that, from the beginning of the weekend to race day, you could see the progress being made. So, we'll see how it all goes. But I think the ultimate, just to sort of sum it all up, the ultimate thing is that it was just a weekend where everybody was struggling. Everybody wasn't quite sure what was happening. And each weekend we have from now on, they'll have more knowledge, they'll have more data, they'll find more solutions, and things will get better. So I think China will be a bit chaotic because of the sprint format in the second race, which is wild because sprint formats are hard. But I think things will settle down quite quickly. The order may change as well.
I do agree with you on that. And if anything, I'm so glad you brought up Aston Martin. I left them off my notes because of two reasons. One, I'm accustomed to having 10 slots. Two, neither of the cars finished. So they didn't show up in my list. And so that's why I'm so glad that you caught me on that, Joe. And if anything, here's one of the things that when I was thinking about them as I was doing my race notes is, one, I'm understanding that the engine versus the chassis, kind of putting those two together, is not an easy proposition, and that the Adrian Newey aspect of him having the gardening leave and coming in and being able to, into that role fully, then affected the timeline. But the power unit elements had to already have been in process. So by the time those two come together in alignment, you've got two tracks that have been developing, and someone's had to say, oh, wait a minute, we've got to make an adjustment, and they've got to go back to Honda and have those conversations. What I also understand is that Honda, since its time of departing from Formula One, had reoriented various people in the positions who weren't working on this development of an engine for the Formula One needs. And so they'd kind of reorganization, I guess is the best way to put it. And now they had to kind of put back that team of people, the experts, individuals. And so that group of people now has to come in and basically reread and recalibrate. That's not stuff that you can just do on a quick dime. It's going to take months for that to adjust. So as much as I want to see Aston Martin do well, I mean, I feel like they have put so much money and effort and time and have all the pieces. It seems like it's a question of the pieces coming together properly in the right order and alignment. Do you see, both of you, either one of you can answer and help me kind of process through this?
Yeah, I mean, it's an example of what happens with Honda every time. And it's what part of their philosophy. They rotate young engineers into the program to teach them how to be quick, reactive, sharp thinking. Then they rotate them out and you get another lot come in. So Honda is always going up and down, because there's always new brains coming in, but usually they're very good brains. So in terms of when Adrian arrived, he probably said, no, this is no good. We're going to do things differently. So that was another form of pressure, because then there was time pressure as well. I'm absolutely sure that happened, because that's what he would normally do. And I think that probably, mashing together the Honda situation with the chassis situation, I don't think the chassis is bad at all. We don't know how good it is. So I don't think it's bad. And I just think that the power unit is way behind where it should be. It won't be forever, but I do think we're not looking at them doing anything dramatic this year. I don't think it's even a matter of months. I think it's you've got to go, and this is the fundamental problems there to be that far off. But you never know. Sometimes things happen.
Okay, well, Joe, I know that you are having to jump and go to a plane, so we thank you so much for your time and your insights, and we will say goodbye to you.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Thanks.
Safe travels.
Okay, Dick, I just want to wrap up with you. Do you have any other thoughts on the Aston Martin aspect of this? I know you're a huge Aston Martin fan.
Well, yeah, I'm a huge Alonso fan. And of course, when the first lap completed and saw that old Fred was up to 10th, I was just sort of like, you got to be kidding me. And of course, I'm watching the race with my son, Derek, and who is a even bigger Alonso fan. And we're jumping up and down, high-fiving it and reminding ourselves, oh, mom's asleep in the in the next room. We better be quiet. It was hard, but we knew it wouldn't last, But anyway, no, I think what Joe is saying is correct. I will say that his point about the car seeming to get better from the Friday to the Saturday to the Sunday was very astute. And if you read some of the things that Mike Crack said today, he gave a much more upbeat analysis of how their weekend went. Yes, they still have problems. I don't think they had the engine turned up all the way. It would be interesting to find out for sure whether or not they did. But, certainly they've at least got some interim step that has significantly reduced that vibration problem that they've been having. So, fingers crossed. I'm not expecting any miracles anytime soon, but maybe we can see some steady development. So we'll see.
I do like that idea of steady development versus a major miracle happening. And hopefully that will sustain all of the people at the team as they try to figure out a way out of this. You flagged it in your race notes. We talked about it just a little bit, which is the opening laps between George and Charles swapping the leads, and whether the passes were, in our opinions, I think we both agreed that they didn't feel very organic as much as they were energetic and wonderful.
Fun to watch.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wondered, in your opinion as a racer and coming from your background as an engineer, how do you feel watching that kind of racing?
Oh, boy, that's a great question. There's a part of me that says, I love the fact that guys can actually pass and be repassed. But then there's the other part of me that is when I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I don't know about that, because of what we saw. There was a race years and years ago in Indy cars at Michigan Speedway, 2-mile high banked oval. And they ran a device called the Hanford device, which basically was a aerodynamic device that took away a lot of the efficiency of the ground effect cars that they were running at that time. And what it produced was this insane race where there were 2 and 3 passes a lap for the lead. It was incredibly thrilling, but it was manufactured, and so I don't know. It's the lady with the scales almost, how do you want to balance that out? So I'm not sure how I feel, because there's a part of me, I just enjoyed watching them go at it. But then there was the other part of me was like, yeah, but so that's kind of where my head was at.
Okay. Yeah. I'm still weighing that out when you say the lady with the scales. I think my instinct is that's not sustainable. And I think I even said that in my race notes. I'd rather have quality overtakes than a high quantity of what eventually feels like, whatever. They just moved in front of each other, this rotational swapping. But I think what I have taken away from this conversation with both of you is that we'll see more iterations, and that'll give us a greater level of clarity as to, is this truly going to be what we see for the next set of the year, let alone this portion of the reg cycle. I mean, it's literally just one race. I think that's the thing I had to keep telling myself afterwards. It's just one race. We cannot take too much weight onto this and get too concerned. If anything, I did see that, and I had hoped we would get to this conversation with Joe, is that it looks like that they're going to make some kind of rules adjustment. They'd already anticipated this before we even got to Australia, and that it could be as soon as Japan. And so I thought, okay, if that was already in the works, but they did not want to attempt anything before Australia, and then going back to what we said about the possibility of 2 races not occurring, that might give just enough of a window of time for them to make the necessary adjustments to figure out where is the inorganic aspects of this, and where are some of the gaps that we can fill that will allow for the truly organic to continue being the lifeblood of the sport and avoid what feels artificial. So I'm hopeful. I think as much as I've pushed back, I do still have hope that the sport, maybe that's because of what both of you and even John have shared over the years, it's made me think that the sport does want to do the right thing. It's just figuring out and getting that consensus as to what's achievable in the term that we have. Well, okay, so any other thoughts or recommendations for our fans who are new to the sport?
Yeah, I think you have to recognize that the Melbourne circuit was kind of specific in that everybody knew that it was going to be very difficult to balance out, the deployment of energy versus the harvesting of energy. And now we're going to China, We're going to China with a massively long straight. But then the rest of the track doesn't have that many long straightaways. So again, every race is going to be about harvesting versus deployment. It will be interesting to see if they run out of energy going down that really, really long straightaway in China, because it's basically one corner that you would go through after that straightaway, and then you're on the pit straight, which is not short, but it's certainly nothing like the other ones. So now what happens? I mean, I can't imagine they're going to recharge the battery up in one corner. And so what are the strategies going to be? So I think it's going to be interesting to see, from that standpoint. Again, I hate the idea of guys downshifting at the end of a long straightaway before they need to. It's just kind of, I don't like it, but hey, it's the sport that you got right now. So away you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And if anything, I think my consistent refrain has been, this is only one race and it's the first race. And everyone was learning as they went. I think that was the thing that even Joe said earlier. And testing was limited under these rules, which means that Australia was the moment when months of the theory and modeling went into application mode. And I think of it as the opening act of a grand science experiment on a very global stage. That's the way I would want any new fan to approach this, and that the energy fluctuations, the drivers slowing on the streets, the cars behaving unpredictably, it's because I think, and even the fact that they're willing to adjust the formula shows that the formula isn't static and has the ability to be modified, and it's just iteration one. So I hope that especially the new fans who may have come and not experienced this before, that they will stick through this and be willing to give the sport the time to make the adjustments that it needs.
Yep, exactly. China will be interesting this weekend for sure.
Yeah. Cannot believe we're already gonna have another race. We went amount of weeks without it, and now all of a sudden, boom, 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 we've got a bunch of one after the other. It's kind of good.
Exactly.
Okay. On that note, I will say, Dick, it was great talking to you. And even though Joe's not on anymore, it was great talking to him as well. I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too.
Okay, friends, what did you think of this conversation? We'd love to hear from you. What questions are you wrestling with? What should we dive into next? Send them to Sabrina at 2guysagirlandf1.com. We read every single one, and frankly, your questions are usually more interesting than what we'd come up with on our own. And with that, let me say, this ends our conversation. But we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in because we're just two guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.